Alright lads, so yesterday we did get the announcement of our next set of Limit Breaker quests, and as always before this quest does officially release, we're going to be going over all the best characters, recommendations that you can use to best tackle this and maybe try and get all the rewards. And it's maybe worth mentioning now that it does seem to be the standard. Every time we do get a next set of Limit Breaker quests, we also get limited time achievements. That way we can slowly but surely build up our Brave Ribbon counter. But in this case, having a look at the rules, right? So slot 1 wants us to bring a mind character that is ranged with Quincy Killer. And of course, that is going to be designed in mind for the newly released Christmas Retsu. Slot 2, we want to bring a speed no affiliation killer. In this case, this is for Owetsu. Maybe confirming that Owetsu is going to be available in the next 2 weeks for those that maybe want to pull on his rerun. And then slot 3, while you can technically bring any character you want to, they are wanting you to mainly bring a Technique Storyper killer. And in this case, our most newest Technique Storyper is 1000 Year Blood War Giselle. So on your screen right now is the team that Caleb want you to bring. If you bring them, you're most likely going to get very far because all 3 characters are going to be great here. I mean, Giselle is going to be good in slot 3, and the enemies you go against in slot 3 usually have less HP, so Giselle will shine more, maybe in slot 3 when compared to her first appearance in slot 1 last month. Owetsu is an absolute beast, so you know he's going to be amazing in slot 2. And then of course, if you do pull the new Retsu, she's going to be great in slot number 1. With that said though, now let's look at some potential alternative options in case you aren't pulling on this upcoming end of month banner. So slot 1, again, we want to bring a mind character, right? That's non-negotiable. You want to bring a mind character. If we sort by Quincy Killer, that is also a ranged character. What you are going to see here is 2 somewhat good characters. More so 1 good and 1 somewhat good, that being Bargo. I mean, you can bring him, but I think you would have to have this character max transcended, and considering his limited status as a Burn the Witch unit, you most likely don't have him that worked on. But if you have no other better option, you might as well take him out. But I think a better alternative is going to be Swimsuit Menina, because she is going to get all the buffs there. She's a mind character, she's ranged with Quincy Killer, and she herself does have a good damage output. While her strong attacks might not be like the greatest, but she does have Frenzy +2 with 100% more damage to enemies not afflicted by an ailment, and given the fact that she is going to have Killer here, she will definitely make for a good lead if you are just trying to at least maybe get to stage 20 at 22, assuming you have 2 other good characters. She can potentially be a reason for you not to pull an end of month for the sole purpose of getting far into Limit Breaker. She does have some benefits with her too. Her SA2 is going to be a heal and also barrier, giving your team more protection. Because I mean, I've done a lot of Limit Breaker quests, especially for videos, and if I take 1 hit, the run's basically over depending on the team that I am using. So having that extra protection, at least if you're trying to constantly go for a high score where you need to get a perfect run, she will help out. If you just kind of go in and take what you get, then maybe you might not appreciate that SA2 a lot, but for me, knowing how many times I usually reset in Limit Breaker, I very much do like having some type of way to heal or protect your teammates, and that's what Menina is going to do here. I'd like to say she's going to be really good and your best alternative option, maybe second best. We'll talk about another character in a minute. But I've done Limit Breaker quests where I had to use someone like Senjumaru, and damage output, they're basically the exact same. And Senjumaru performs quite well, so I would like to say that this Menina would also perform quite well too. And that's it for our range Quincy killers. What you then can do, assuming you don't have Menina, is using Ishin. He just came back recently, and even with Menina getting all the bonuses here, in this case, Ishin won't get that 2 times range damage. He still might be the better character, because his damage output, as we all are aware, can get very high, because he does have the 50% Berserker, he has Frenzy +2 with an increased Starsman chance against any heart enemy with the 120% spiritual pressure boost. And if that wasn't enough, you have the weakened defense, so if you decide to use your soul bomb, you're doing more damage, and you also have rampage, so after 100 kills, you're doing 100% more damage. If that wasn't enough though, and maybe where even though he is getting technically less damage output in terms of rules when against Menina, and to a certain extent, and maybe even Retsu, you never know how it might turn out. Ishin is an amazing character. He does have the advantage of having burn and also lacerate, so that's doing double damage over time stat elements. So another character, if you aren't pulling on this end of month, you don't even maybe need Retsu because this character will carry you. I'm definitely going to try both Menina and also Ishin and see who's better. And I feel like Ishin's going to be better here because even if his damage output starts to lack in the later stages, he's always going to have that constant burn and lacerate. And that's very powerful in Limit Breaker when enemies can have millions of HP. Like always, when Ishin can be used, you can also get away using Lisa, but understand her damage output nearly isn't as good. And you really are going to want to have this character max transcended, maybe even solely rely on the lacerate. In her case, she's a very similar character to Ishin, has lacerate in all of her attacks, has the increased chance, but damage output is the bigger difference between these two characters. And she only has 1 lacerate, 1 damage over time stat augment when compared to Ishin's double. The paralysis is nice though, so while you might not be doing a lot of damage, you will at the very least make it an easy run, constantly paralyzing and lacerating the enemies so they aren't running all over the place. Other than that, when it comes to Mind Quincy Killers, that's your best bet. If we have a look at, ignore Quincy Killer, let's look at Mind Deranged characters. Are there any better alternatives? Not so much. I mean, some potential standouts would be Candice, Esno, maybe even Nini. More so Nini, to be fair, I would say are decent options to use here. But you're definitely going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling finding a good character here. If you're just strictly looking at Mind Range characters, can we ignore the Mind attribute advantage and look at Range Quincy Killers? Are there any great ones? No one that you would really want to use over a Mind character like Meninia and also again Ishin. So that's going to be your other alternatives for slot number 1. Let's have a look at slot 2. So Mind No Affiliation Killer. That is melee based. So like we already stated, Uetsu is going to be best in slot for this slot. No Affiliation Killer Plus, so he's doing 40% more damage. The character itself has Frenzy Plus 2 with 140% more damage to enemies not afflicted by an ailment. And if that was enough, he then can get an additional Frenzy Plus 1 with the Berserker from the gauge effect. Uetsu is an absolutely amazing character, and I really like that he is another character that we can use in Limit Breaker because I had a lot of fun using him when he was first available, like what, 2 months ago? Which is kind of crazy if that means he is coming back this month, which he should do. If a character like this clearly wants to be used in slot 2, it means they will be returning while the Limit Breaker quest is active. And just like when Uetsu first came out, another alternative that you can use is going to be this character right here. 7th Anniversary Uryu. You definitely would want to have this character duped out. His damage output, I mean, is still good. He has Frenzy Plus 2 and a 40% strong attack damage buff with weakening, increased chance. He has the stam recovery, so again, if anyone takes damage, you can potentially still keep the run going, and then you have that extra 100% Berserker. His Sobum can apply a debuff, so you do a tad bit more damage. Anytime Uetsu is available to be used, likewise so is Uryu. Obviously, the difference between the two is quite big, but that's where duplicates come in handy, and I know a lot of people do have this character duped out. And funny enough, what you actually could do here, right, is assuming you are using Meninia in slot 1, and then you're using Uryu in slot 2, like, for example, when we used Uryu the first time during the Uetsu Limit Breaker quest, you can also potentially use Gremmy. And Gremmy is a character that you can use in slot 3. He won't have Killer, but he has that 2 times technique damage. And with Gremmy in the team, it's making him and also Meninia do more damage. More so Uryu though, because he will be able to inflict stat augments and then get that 30% damage increase. So if you do plan to use someone like Gremmy in slot 3, it definitely will make using Uryu in slot 2 look a lot more impressive because you are getting that extra bit of damage. Other than him though, let's look at some other alternatives, right? So we can look at melee speed characters, in this case Kenpachi, Senjumaru, 1000-Year Blood War Yachiru, and also Sangdu. The thing with them though is I feel like the killer is going to make a big difference when compared to someone like Uetsu and also Uryu. So them not having killer will definitely be tough. I know many people tried to use Yachiru, and even if she's max transcended, you know, it definitely can still be a bit difficult, but I would say Yachiru, Sangdu, more so those two, and Kenpachi are going to be good here. Kenpachi more so would be a bit awkward to use, I will be honest, because he doesn't have an increased chance against no affiliation enemies. He does have the Innovator and Lacerator, so there is that going for him, but, you know, if you played with Kenpachi, as great as he is, I would never not praise this unit. He is a bit awkward to use in content like Limit Breaker when you're constantly moving forward. More so Guild Quest content where it's a small room, he goes crazy. In Limit Breaker, he's a bit clunky to use, but again, if you have not a better option, you definitely can get away using him. At least one would hope so. And with that said, are there any ranged no affiliation killers that we can use here? In this case, maybe for example, give Macy a try. I believe we also used her during the Uetsu Limit Breaker quest. She performed relatively well. She in particular will give herself recharge in between stages, so every time she's next available, strong attacks are ready to go and be used. She has the paralysis and the weakening, so when you do inflict a status, which you can do with your SA2 Tracking Vortex, it will be keeping the enemies in place and then also letting you do 50% more damage. Keep in mind though, she has no increased chance, so you are going to have to get lucky, but I feel like she'll be a good substitute nonetheless if you don't own Uryu and also Uetsu. And I'd say that's really it when it comes to the second slot. The standouts definitely are going to be Uryu, Macy, and of course also Uetsu, with some other alternatives like Kenpachi and also Unohana Sangdu being used for slot number 2. Then that takes us into the final one, right? Where technically you could just bring any technique character. So in this case, bring your best technique unit. If you've pulled Giselle last month, definitely bring her. She's going to be amazing here, like we saw when she was last available to be used in Limit Breaker. The Dominate stat augment is really good for protection. It keeps you safe, but most importantly, it will ensure that the poised enemies are doing crazy damage to each other at some point in the millions. Giselle in particular has a good damage output. She has Frenzy +2, a 60% Berserker with 130% more damage to dominated or status afflicted enemies. You then get the 80% spiritual pressure boost that weaken defense, making it a good option to use the Sobbum on. With your increased chance because there are swipers, Giselle's going to be really good here. Best in slot for slot 3. But then again, maybe, depending on your Transcendence level, maybe you have Grammy more duped out, invested in when compared to Giselle. Maybe you're using Uryu in slot 2. Well, like I said, Grammy is going to be a great character to use here. Obviously, as we know, Kenpachi and Grammy, especially Grammy, insane damage output, right? He has Frenzy 3, an 80% spiritual pressure boost, 30% more damage to drained and paralyzed enemies. You have the Track and Vortex. You have such a good strong attack here. The EX can debuff and also boost, letting you clear your stage faster, letting your teammates then clear their stage faster because they have extra stats. If you're using Quincy's, you're giving them more damage output. The only thing that makes them awkward, to a very certain extent, because we are talking about one of the best characters in the game right now, is that his increased chance to inflict stat ultimate is only to hollow enemies. So when up against Swipers, your status procs might not be as reliable, but you're definitely going to be constantly keeping that 80% spiritual pressure boost. The thing is though, he does have a Dragon Vortex with Frenzy 3, so even though he doesn't have an increased chance, he's still going to reliably inflict stat ultimate, maybe not as consistent as he would have if he had Killer against hollow enemies. I mean, ever since Limit Breaker first came out, whenever you can bring a technique character, you're going to want to bring Grammy. In this case, definitely can use him if you do not own Giselle. For the other slots, I mean, there's no like massively standoutish technique character. We have some other good tech characters, but maybe not as good when it comes to Limit Breaker content. You know, Shinji should be relatively fine. I'd actually like to say, to be fair, he would be fine. He does have an increased chance against Swipers. He won't have Killer here. He won't have Killer, but he will have his increased chance, so he'll be constantly inflicting weakening and also confusion. He then does do more damage to confused enemies, and weakening gives you more damage too. I personally do not own this character, so I can't try him out, but I would like to say that this character would be relatively decent in slot 3, especially because he is getting that 2x technique damage output. Maybe you could give it Bambietta a try. I mean, she was a character designed for Limit Breaker. In her case, once she defeats 25 enemies, she will be giving your entire team a 20% killer increase, which might help them deal more damage, right? Her increased chance, though, is only to Aaroniero, so that's going to be awkward. She is not like Grammy that has Frenzy 3 with a Track and Vortex, but the last rate might come in handy, so you might want to give her a try. Ichibei might be a decent character to use here. He does have Killer, and when the gauge is active, which you should reliably do, especially against the weaker stages, he will be constantly stacking that boost, where he will then get an additional Frenzy +1 and 100% more Berserker. The only problem with a character like this is that he really does want the gauge effect active, and up against the poised enemy stages where you will be spending maybe a bit too much time on, you will start to notice that lack of damage output when the gauge is not active, but he should make a decent substitute for slot number 3 nonetheless. And I'd say that's really about it. I mean, you can potentially get away using Beyond Bankai Toshiro, and maybe even Aizen. I mean, Aizen, you know, right now is the hardest hitting normal attack damage character in the game. He has a boost in barrier, allowing your team to do more damage, to have their protection too. He has an increased chance to inflict weakening against any speed enemy, and since he's a normal attack damage character, I mean, he's never not dealing insane damage, right? He's always going to be doing a lot of damage, especially when the gauge is active. So I would say slot 3 has a decent set of characters that you can use here. I would say your 3 standouts are going to be Giselle, Grammy, and of course, also Shinji. So on your screen right now, like I did say earlier at the start of the video, this is going to be the best team that you can bring. If I do not pull Retsu because I don't plan to summon all that much on the end of month banner, I'm just going to rely on Ishin and or Meninya. Both of them are going to be good substitutes for slot 1. And assuming I didn't have any character best in slot for slot 1, 2, and 3, I would use Ishin, Uryu, and probably Grammy. Have none of those characters, then at that point you have to work with what you got. Limit Breaker quests in particular can change every month. The amount of stamina these enemies have are never dead set, so you never know what you're going into until you try it out. But I'd like to say this definitely shouldn't be our worst one based on the rules that we have here. I think we have some decent characters we can use. I've seen worse rules, I've seen better, but me personally, I definitely don't feel the need to pull an end of month specifically for Limit Breaker. I feel like I'll be fine with both Ishin and also Meninya as my go-to slot 1 character. Either way, let me know what your team is in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and peace.